Hello and welcome to a new episode of Clever Together. Today we're going to be talking about stakeholders. And today, to do that, I am welcoming Erik Schumb to the show. Erik, welcome to the Clever Together podcast.
Thanks for having me, Corinne.
You are most welcome. We met actually just this week at an ICF Coaching Week event, and you were facilitating a session on virtual team development. We got chatting a little bit about stakeholders, and I often wonder whether stakeholders are as involved as they'd like to be, or if they contribute. I guess all of this can be managed, but this is something I'd like to talk about because in a lot of the podcasts that I listen to about Agile, it's nearly always about the team itself. I'd like to ask you then, who is the stakeholder?
This is interesting. Is it really only one? I would say it can be so many, depending on the context. You know, my background is a market researcher. In market research, when you do a market analysis, there's a great model from a Harvard professor. His name is Porter. And Porter 5 Forces, I think, is a great model where you get really the basic stakeholders for a market. For example, the supplier, there are new entrants, which could be the competitors as well. Customers are there. Porter calls that the power or the stakeholding power of the buyers. So really the customers are one of the most important stakeholders that should always be considered. And of course, there are substitutes, maybe new companies. These are, I would say, the external stakeholders. Of course, need to consider internal stakeholders as well within a company, be it a team lead, be it a chief executive officer, be it a marketing department. So this is a very basic differentiation, the internal and the external stakeholders. And recently, I came across a design thinking company in Germany. That guy introduced the concept of a persona, let's say, of the planet Earth, which I really liked, because this brings something which has even become more important in COVID-19, our awareness of planet Earth as a stakeholder. And this is a great concept where traditionally in design thinking, personas are human beings, a certain age, of certain characters, people, men, women, whatever, you want to design a product. And if you involve planet Earth as a stakeholder from the start, think how powerful that is with respect to sustainability. I think this is an amazing, simple, great idea.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think what you were just saying there about the planet and environmental friendly, this has definitely come more to the fore, I think, in the last year and a half. And it's been very gradual, but I think it's been very significant. And I don't think it's temporary.
Absolutely. Yeah, it will become even more important. And you recognize as well, there are some global initiatives dealing with sustainability, be it the 17 sustainability goals, be it initiatives like the economy of the common good, which is an initiative, I think it comes from Germany, but it's spread all over the globe as well. And I'm a CRU coach, it's Otto Scharmer from the MIT, who developed that methodology, that framework of change management, where he talks about, the importance of planet Earth, the planet body, which is one of the most important things to consider.
Yeah, definitely. You have a design thinking background, and we talked a little bit earlier about there being a persona. And I think when you and I learned about marketing a long time ago, it was all about demographics and things like this. But I think now there's been a huge shift, hasn't there, towards more behavioral factors. How does that person react in this situation? What do they want? What would they like more of? How do they react? It's more about how we interact with the product, the service, what we want out of that. And I think that's very interesting. I think that's very closely linked, isn't it, to a lot of the design thinking decisions that are made.
Absolutely. I cannot more than agree. And, I think many design thinking workshops indeed start with something that we would call a stakeholder mapping. And the interesting thing is when you do that not as a prerequisite, but you collaboratively find an approach to that. So you ask all participants in a workshop, from your perspective, which are the major stakeholders that we need to consider for our product or service design? And then you might be amazed what persona might come up, right? Quite seldom, I think that awareness of planet Earth as a persona is not so much there, but of course it's an easy thing to add. And I guess there is a huge differentiation. What do you design in the design thinking? Do you design a process, for internal process improvement, be it an HR process, finance and accounting, supply chain, whatever the traditional business processes, or is it really a new product and service design which is focused on the end clients where you earn money? Because then, that customer is always the most important persona then, I'd say.
Yeah, that's right. How do you think we can incorporate the stakeholders more? Because, they are involved by nature of the process more in the innovation stage. But do you think we could be doing more to really make them feel as if they're an integral part of the process?
I think the first step, this is quite comparable to what we do in our team development process that I introduced when you joined that session. It's awareness building. Just start creating awareness about which stakeholders there are and keep that awareness alive, I would say, be it with design thinking or, in agile teams. They quite often have nice decorated walls in their shop areas or whiteboards where you can really say, hey, these are our major personas that we deal with. And so keep that steadily alive, that idea that there are persons we have to attract. And of course, it's the most obvious personas, the most obvious stakeholders. They are always present. The boss is always there, sitting around me, maybe the chief executive officer at the company as well. But then I think, depending on the process where you are in a product design or really the build phase where you build a product and create a new product, then this might be different. And then this is, I think, the task really of a team lead more, or somebody who takes that role to raise that awareness of that persona then.
Yeah, I guess you could even create some more visualization around that, really, couldn't you?
This has become a very common thing. I think I know many agile coaches who have been trained on visual communication. I don't know if you know Bikablo, Bildkartenblock in Germany.
Yes, I've heard about them.
Myself did a training in that, and it's so easy to paint simple persons and then, equip them with characteristics which makes them suddenly a persona. And then it's easy to remember. It's a kind of an embodiment. So if you talk, how can we raise awareness about stakeholders? The other aspect is really find a way to embody it, be it with visuals, be it really with, in theory, you have, for example, an exercise which is called social presence theater, where you work with the body. It's a kind of a constellation work, I would say. Oh, well, we talked already about Lego Serious Play, for example. You can build your stakeholders really with Lego. And there is a special set in Lego, which is called the connector set. And you connect that stakeholder items or strategic elements with a connector set. And if you pull one element, you might recognize which others of that elements move as well, more or less.
Oh, right.
Really
Nice.
Systemic, very, very lively approach which raises awareness.
Yeah, that's right. If any of you are listening that you're interested in Lego Serious Play, then we do have another episode about that with Susanne Heiss. I'll put the link to that in the show notes. But yeah, I think definitely in terms of complexity, it's vital to be aware of who the stakeholders are. But not just that, I think we need to be aware of, what's in it for them. What do they want to get out of this? What's their big inspiration to get involved? And what's their experience been as a stakeholder before they came and joined your project? Because it might well be that they've had a negative experience in the past.
Of course, that's true. And this is a little bit, allow me the term, unfortunately, the traditional thinking of the human beings that, all want to succeed somehow. And, as an employee, exactly, you as an employee, you succeed when you make your boss successful. So
yes.
Maybe that's it. But stakeholders not always work that way. For example, let me go back to that model of Porter's 5 forces, where one stakeholder is, for example, regulatory authority. They partially hinder innovation. And long time in the banking industry, they said, hey, we have a strong regulation. We have the BaFin in Germany. They would never allow. And then came the startups. And the startups suddenly built products which the customer likes. And suddenly there was pressure on that stakeholder. They did not have anything. They had really huge worries because the pressure of the market was so high. So that stakeholder under pressure,
yeah,
they were able to react. this is, of course, another way which has become more and more common in the past, that you can influence somehow, that you can put pressure on stakeholders, in meaning not that they are successful, not in the first instance, but then they need to react to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are the ways that we can get the stakeholders involved then?
I always try, when I have workshop settings, to involve them all. I try to avoid homogeneous teams. I try to involve experts from different angles. It's best indeed when you could have each stakeholder represented in a team. Of course, that would increase the complexity to a certain level, but depending on where you are in your process, for example, towards prototyping, then I think you would become successful. Let me give you the example of a design sprint. You might know that book, which has been published by Jake Knapp, Google Sprints.
Oh, tell us the title of that, because we're always keen to hear about new titles.
Sprint, solve big problems and test new ideas in just 5 days. This is a very special methodology framework. Jake Knapp from Google Ventures had developed that, and design sprints have become very, very common. And in a design sprint, you carefully select few persons, maybe 5 to 10, from different angles. You try to represent, of course, team members involved, different stakeholders to an extent. You carefully select few persons, maybe 5 to 10, from different angles. You try to represent, of course, team members involved, different stakeholders to an extent, and you bring people in a container. I define a container with a certain room. It could be a virtual room and a time,
Okay.
And you have them for 5 days in a container, and you try to avoid anything else but focus on our topic, on our problem-solving topic.
Right. No pizza till you're done.
Exactly. And take care about the catering, by the way. And then, on the third or fourth days, you really are able, in that methodology, to test your product directly with the stakeholders. You invite them and you present an early prototype, be it a paper prototype, whatever, a wireframe, whatever, and you can get an immediate reaction from that stakeholder.
Great.
I remember one design sprint I moderated where we had invited our client for whom we designed it. It was a police department in a huge global city. We invited the chief commissioner of that police department and said, would that solution be something you would purchase?
Right. And they can see that it's just a first draft kind of thing. It's just a prototype, but it gets them on board right from the get-go.
Exactly. It was a customer perspective. In that case, we did not have a representative like a regulator, but you could distribute roles in design thinking. For example, you have inspiration cards. You could say something, hey, do you want to take the role of the regulator? And suddenly you have someone like a challenger.
Yeah, I think that's why improv is so popular, isn't it, in the Agile world?
Exactly, yeah. And this is interesting, and suddenly to recognize perspective change, raises awareness about stakeholders as well. We all have an amazing knowledge about our stakeholders that we do not want to maybe disclose from the first instance, but then you suddenly have the role and you can be that person. And it's fun to play that persona or whatever, that stakeholder. So that raises again awareness, right?
Absolutely. So number one would be awareness of who the stakeholders are and to visualize that as far as possible. Number two would be get them involved in workshops right from the outset.
Exactly. In the middle between that 1 and 2 that you mentioned, I would say raise awareness about the needs. Make really, let's say, like a mapping of what are the concerns of that stakeholders, How are they systemically involved in a topic, And identify that, write that down with the collaborative, sorry for that hard English word for me.
Oh, it's horrible.
Collaborative approach and collect that together. And this then you can really create and shape a nice persona, not only giving a visual, but really put some flesh on the bones, as you say. And then, what I really like, I don't know if you know that word, ONA, organizational network analysis. This is
Mm-hmm.
something really interesting, and it's more and more common as well when you develop organizations, of course, but have a look of the network analysis, where are you in your individual position in a network of your stakeholders? Again, that is that idea of the system thinking. And you might want to paint really that network
Mm-hmm.
and, systematically analyze that network. Then you have an organizational network analysis.
Right.
You might find backdoors and the main entry, and, you might be able to identify ways then better to, implement a new product or service.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, good. So we've got awareness of who the stakeholders are, what their needs are, and that helps you create a persona.
Mm-hmm.
Get them involved in the workshops. And finally, you need to show and visualize or map the systemic context to really show how everyone is interconnected. Okay, so who's expected to do what, who knows what, that
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
I would consider these the four most important elements.
Right. Good. So I'd just like to talk to you a little bit about the difference between internal stakeholders then and external stakeholders. So very often, if there are internal stakeholders, there's sometimes a little bit of complexity or awkwardness around conventional hierarchy. So they're moving from their conventional part of the organization into this agile bubble, for example. What can we do then to pick up those individuals?
This indeed is, I think, the hugest challenge, I would say, in each innovation program or for each and every kind of digital transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And this requires then really a little bit of work and coaching on the mindset. As we say in Germany, the Fisch stinkt vom Kopf. You translate it for me, please. If you don't have the top leadership in board and the hierarchy needs to be in board, then, you would not be successful. You need to convince them somehow about the meaningfulness of something, that they really would be successful in their own jobs. And you can make with a meaningful and well thought through innovation process, your leadership at the end, the company, you make them successful. And you need to build on that. And a kind of a new leadership we need for that, which is more and more seen, is that what some call in the agile space servant leaders.
That's true. Yeah.
Might want to try to educate them towards servant leaders, recognizing they need to help you get the budget for something. Mm-hmm. They need to free you space. They need to talk with your bosses that you are allowed to enter an innovation team and get rid of the other job, whatever, for more flexibility. Well, I have my own company, and with my network partners, we recognize more and more how much leadership development trainings we can offer exactly to educate those kinds of stakeholders.
Yeah, it's very closely connected, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, I think too that it's a tricky one, but I think getting easier the more mainstream Scrum and Agile becomes, because you're not having to convince people that it works anymore. I mean, we've at least gone beyond that. But it is difficult if you're getting experienced people to join the team. Experienced people tend to have a little bit more baggage, let's say, and that's sometimes quite tricky. It's a mindset matter, isn't it?
What I found great, I had to manage the management board from a huge German bank. And they themselves brought in a special type of stakeholders, I could call them. It was the young professionals,
right.
Engaged young professionals. They sat in our management board meeting where we talk about the strategy, and they wanted to decide about the top 14 technologies they want to invest money in, like artificial intelligence, cloud, whatever. They had 2 or 3 young persons, highly engaged persons, of course, and they asked them for their opinion because they represented the future generation. They represented the future board. In Theory U, there is a nice term which is called presencing. So they did that unconsciously. They said, from where we are today, having a look in the future, what do we need to, and this is again that aspect of sustainability, right? What do we need, or who can we consider that this might be, become successful, and not only on the short term, but rather on the long term. By the way, the German Mittelstand is great in, but the stock traded companies, the top 500, whatever, they sometimes rather look for 3 to 5 years and for just the dividends. Whereas when you have a look at the family-owned companies, you suddenly recognize they think in decades. The heritage for their children, much more sustainability, so that stakeholder of the next generations are much, much more there.
Yeah. I think family businesses are a unique group of people. And I think this is quite challenging. I grew up in a family business, so I know that very well. Yeah, cool. So I think we've talked about lots of very cool things around stakeholders today. We'll probably be exploring that a little bit more next week at the Agile Camp Berlin. In fact, you never know. We might even put together a session. Let's see.
Sounds exciting.
Okay, so thank you for joining me today, Erik.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
And to my listeners, I will be back next Thursday at 3 p.m. with a new episode of Clever2gether. And I'll probably have some interesting interviews from the camp itself. So take care. I'll speak to you very soon. It's Corinne Wilhelm from the Clever2gether podcast, brought to you by Bite-Sized English. And don't forget, be the very best communicator that you can be. Goodbye.